Adams, and this is the Weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps new genealogists get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. Genealogy is one of these hobbies that has a lot of space in it. We're not all out there just kind of doing the same thing. We all pretty much start the same way, with dreams of building a thorough family tree full of incredible stories, but somewhere along the way, a component of genealogy really grabs a hold of us, and we go all the way down the rabbit hole. For some people, that's looking for an ancestor who fought in every American war. For others, it's trying to connect yourself to English royalty. Since about 2012, for many of us, it's been trying to figure out how you're related to all 70,000 of your DNA matches. There's kind of a game aspect to it, but there's also an actual practical application as well. If you work on enough of your matches, you'll inevitably start to find new ancestors in parts of your tree that had previously been brick walls. It's a lot of fun, and you can expand your tree while you're at it. But if you do it enough, you'll likely encounter a match that you should be able to figure out your relation to, but for some reason your trees just aren't coming together. There will be plenty of matches that you won't be able to figure out because your most recent common ancestor, or MRCA, will be just beyond what's reliably findable via genealogical means. If your MRCA was in 17th century Bulgaria, you're probably out of luck. So, I'm not talking about those 17 centimorgan matches that you can't figure out your connection to. I'm talking about that 180 centimorgan match that you just can't figure out. At 180 centimorgans, you should be related to this match within the second cousin range and closer, and at the most, your MRCA should be 5 generations back. So assuming that you've got all your lines traced back, at least 5 generations, and either your match already has theirs built out to 5 generations or you've done it for them, why don't your trees connect anywhere? Well, there's no easy way to say it. You most likely have discovered that either you, your match, or potentially even both of you have what is known as non-paternity events in your family tree. This is kind of a pretty way of saying that in one or more of the generations on one or more of your trees, the parents on paper weren't the parents in reality. It could have been an adoption, documented or undocumented. It could have been one of those switched at birth cases. It could have been a case of infidelity, or it could have been a case of sexual assault. But the bottom line is, answering the question of how you're related to this match will become complicated and will take you some time. But in many, if not in most cases, you can still find the answer. But how do you go about finding that answer? Well, first thing is, you'll need to be prepared to organize. You're most likely not going to find the answer in a single day, and you won't find the answer by just using Ancestry or MyHeritage or whatever genealogy website is your cup of tea. You're going to need to bring to bear most of the genealogy tools that we've talked about over the past year. You'll be using non-genealogy specific tools like Excel or OpenOffice or LibreOffice or Google Sheets to keep track of information. You'll probably want a diagramming tool like SmartDraw or even PowerPoint. But if you're old school, paper works too. But you'll need a way to keep track of all your diagrams. This is going to be a project that I can't really walk you through step by step, but I'll give you a 30,000-foot overview of at least how to get you started. If you've been doing this for a bit and haven't had any other major challenges in finding your relationship to your matches, then it's probably best to start by assuming that the non-paternity event is in your matches tree. It may still end up being in yours, but you'll have to start somewhere. If you've had other issues, or if you have suspicions about the veracity of a certain parent-child relationship in your tree, it's actually a little easier to start by investigating yourself, but most people tend to not want to believe that something like that could exist in their own family, particularly if it looks like that event may have happened not all that long ago. So, I still suggest that you look at your match first, then yourself. It gives you time to sit with the thought. You'll start by verifying your match's tree. Oftentimes, these issues arise when your match has a well-developed tree already and you couldn't see anywhere that it connects to yours. As I said in my episode on being wary of others' research, go ahead and assume that this match has made some errors in their tree. Start back at the first visible person in the tree, meaning the first person that's not listed as private, and build the tree out from there on your own. You already suspect that there is either an error or an NPE somewhere in there, so you'll need to be hypercritical at each step, looking for potential inconsistencies. Don't try to wave away anything unusual that you find, but instead assume that that might be the area of confusion and dig in, trying to find the explanation. If you find an error in their tree, great. Keep building and you may find your link to yours. No NP involved, just careless research. If you get the tree built out to an appropriate generation at which you'd expect your trees to merge and they don't, then yes, you've got an NPE on your hands. The next step, assuming that you're using Ancestry or MyHeritage, is to start looking at your shared matches, something that both sites make pretty easy. If you're on Ancestry, try and do the work necessary to break down the Parent 1 and Parent 2 division into your actual maternal and paternal lines. Once you get these labeled correctly, this will immediately give you a hint into which direction you'll be looking. It can help cut your work in half. MyHeritage doesn't give you this ability, but you can still figure this out with some work. I can't really go in depth here, but if you Google the LEEDS method, that is LEEDS method, it's a great way to cluster your matches into groups of similar relationships. You'll just need to figure out your relationship to one or two people in each of those clusters to immediately make it useful and have a sense of which matches are in which half or even quarter of your tree. Once you've got your matches clustered out, or at least broken down by parent, you'll want to look at the shared matches with the match in question and see if you can figure out your relationship to one of your shared matches, as you'll likely be related to the match in question along the same family line. This relationship won't necessarily be the same, but if you're related to one of your shared matches via your paternal great-grandmother, then that would be the family line of interest as you continue your investigation. None of that is really true if you have a pedigree collapse due to ancestors appearing in multiple locations on your tree. If your maternal and paternal lines have wrapped around each other a few times in the past, that can really complicate trying to figure out what part of your tree might be the connection with the subject match. Assuming that you've been able to figure out your relationship with one or more of your shared matches with the match in question, it's time to hop over to DNApainter.com and look at the shared centimorgan project. Plug in the centimorgan value of your shared DNA with your match in question, and look at all of the possible relationships that you might have. Focus your attention on the most likely matches, but don't zone in too quickly on one particular relationship. Map out these potential relationships on your tree and their tree. From there, start taking a microscope look at your match's tree. The best thing you can do is look for people in their tree who are located in close proximity in both time and space to people in your tree. You'll want to focus your attention on those parts of the tree that lead to common relationships with your shared matches and fall within that predicted relationship window provided by the shared centimorgan project. In most NPE cases I've seen, you'll find your likely candidates this way. If in 1920 your great-grandparents and their great-grandparents were both living in Wellsville, New York, a few blocks from each other, and there's no other points of geographic and temporal overlap, well, you've got a great idea of who you should be focusing your attention on. As you look at the families closer, keep in mind those projected relationship values, and keep in mind that you're likely looking at the half-relation side of the diagram. If we take, for example, our 180 centimorgan match, yes, that person could be a mystery second cousin, but for that to be true, someone from your third generation back on down your matches line would have to have given him up for adoption. In many cases, you'd be able to see evidence of that in documentation. If you see a couple marry, but then they both die in a car accident shortly thereafter, well, perhaps there had been a child. In cases of infidelity and sexual assault, which have been the most probable explanation for most of the NPEs I've seen, you'll be looking on the half-relation side. So, our 180 centimorgan match would be a better fit for somewhere in the half-second cousin range. It can be confusing because DNA recombination creates ranges of predicted shared DNA, so it's best to build out a series of hypotheses and test them against the facts of the documentary history and the science of DNA. Because each of these potential relationships has a range of expected shared DNA, you'll need to keep in mind that the ages of the biological couple in question may not be as close as you might expect. Yes, at 180 centimorgans, a good hypothesis is half-second cousin. But half-first cousin once removed is also a viable hypothesis within a 37% likelihood window. If you've never done this before, it sounds really overwhelming, like something that you're maybe not smart enough to figure out, but trust me, while it is science, it's not rocket science. And while it's not easy, the difficulty really comes from the complexity of the potential relationships that each needs to be tested in order to determine the most likely NPE point. If you have Ancestry Pro Tools, you can see the amount of DNA that your match in question shares with each of your matches in common, which can be really helpful in triangulating the specific individual involved. If this is a challenge that you're facing, I'd really suggest uploading your DNA to gedmatch.com. The tools available to you there, even at the free tier, are so far beyond what Ancestry offers you for DNA analysis. They're not all that user-friendly, and they'll take some time for you to learn about and play around with before anything starts making sense. But if ancestry tools give you a flashlight with which to look at the problem, GEDmatch gives you one of those giant spotlights that police helicopters use to spot suspects. Speaking of suspects, when you upload your profile to GEDmatch, it will ask you if you want to opt in to allowing law enforcement to search your profile for matches with unknown suspects in violent crimes cases. That may sound like a scary intrusion of your privacy, but I'd encourage you to read about it because it's allowed for a quantum leap in solving cold cases. I hope to do an episode about this in the future, but we'll see. So I'd encourage you to opt in. You could help catch a serial murderer. But that's a different topic entirely. This is kind of, in a nutshell, how you'll go about solving your mystery connection with your match. The less DNA you share, the vastly more challenging it will become. There's some tips and tricks to organizing yourself to do this more easily, but we all organize differently, and once you get into it, you'll likely come up with your own method of organizing the mountain of information that you're going to be wading through. What I really want you to know is you can do this. You can figure this out. Please do keep in mind, though, that there are some ethical concerns when solving this sort of mystery. Let's say that you find that NPE situation and you solve the mystery, so you know your match's grandmother and your grandfather had a child together, and that child is your match's father. It's very likely that your match doesn't know this. I am of the mind that your match doesn't need to know this. Imagine the damage that you'll cause by reaching out and excitedly explaining everything that you've found out to this match of yours. What if his grandmother is still alive? That'll make this year's Thanksgiving meal really awkward, won't it? It's also not something that I'd likely share without considerable thought within my own family. I'm a stickler for accuracy in my family tree, but I also think that flesh and blood relationships in the here and now matter more than accuracy of a family tree. Besides, without additional testing, your solution is really only a highly probable hypothesis. So be happy in the knowledge that you figured it out, and if you're going to share that information, please don't do so until you've given thought to all the potential outcomes that information getting into the wild might have. The last thing I'll say along these lines is make sure that any family trees that you build to help you sketch out the possible relationships and work out your way to a solution should be set to private and non-searchable. Now, get out there and go tackle some wicked hard non-paternity events if you find them. This is probably the only time that I won't ask you to tell me about an NPE that you've found before, but if you want to reach out, you always can, and hit me up on Twitter @the WGT Pod or over on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.